If your starting quarterback is Michael Penix, Aaron Rodgers, Caleb Williams, or Jordan Love, you're probably looking for a backup option this week. If you play in a 2 quarterbacks or a super flex league, then you might also be looking for someone to step in and help out as well. Here's my start and sit analysis for every matchup at the quarterback position, and a few guys that you might be able to take a shot on this week, and a few guys you shouldn't. Thursday Night Football may be a little bit more of a defensive matchup than what fantasy owners would like to start the week. Brock Purdy's got a tough matchup going up against the LA Rams, currently allowing the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. But it's not just that it's a tough matchup, it's the fact that apparently he's dealing with a sore toe once again, the same toe that caused him to miss weeks 2 and weeks 3. We'll monitor this throughout the week, and I don't think he has a questionable tag as of right now, but that could clearly change at any point in time. Even if you have Brock Purdy and he plays, I'm only going with Brock Purdy in a 2 quarterback or a super flex league. In a 1 QB league, I may be looking for somebody else. Matthew Stafford finally hit his ceiling last week, and we've talked about the previous 3 weeks of the season that Stafford's been playing really well, but for fantasy purposes, he hasn't really been a top-end quarterback. And this past week, he finished 375, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. His first top 12 finish of the season. But the San Francisco 49ers are tough against quarterbacks as well. They're currently allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. I will roll with Stafford in this game. If you have him and you don't have an option with higher upside, then still go with Stafford because he's got plenty of weapons to still make things work. Minnesota will be over in England for their 2nd consecutive international game, playing against the Cleveland Browns. And a couple of weeks ago, Carson Wentz was the savior of the season for the Minnesota Vikings. After a bunch of inconsistencies with J.J. McCarthy, everybody felt like Wentz had a great performance, and he did from a football standpoint, finished as the QB 13 in fantasy, so not as high as maybe what you would have liked to see there. But then this past week in week 4, he actually played worse, but he finished higher in the fantasy ratings because he threw the ball 46 times. He ended up finishing as the QB 9. 2 interceptions and a fumble, plus he was sacked 6 times. And this Cleveland defense is very solid as well. There is one thing that has changed. When I initially put in all the information, I had Carson Wentz as a sit. I was like, I'm not going to even try and figure out what's going on with Carson Wentz this week. International game, Browns defense, whatever it may be, I'm not really interested in it. Threw a couple of interceptions last week. However, Myles Garrett is reportedly not practicing today, which is Wednesday. Keep an eye on that. If Myles Garrett doesn't play, Carson Wentz actually could creep up to being a fringe start potentially. But I don't know if I'm ready to go there just yet. Who out there is going to trust a rookie quarterback on the road in an international game for their first ever start? Because that's what you would be doing if you start Dillon Gabriel. And you're doing it against the Minnesota defense, currently allowing the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. I know DK Metcalf had a very good week last week. Minnesota's defense still relatively kept Aaron Rodgers in check. He finished 18 of 22 for 200 yards and only 1 touchdown. That's not that great of a performance. Now, if Dillon Gabriel does that, I'm sure Cleveland will be ecstatic about that. But there is no way in the world from a fantasy standpoint that I'm rolling with Dillon Gabriel in his first ever start. For Las Vegas and Indianapolis, this was supposed to be a renaissance of a couple of quarterbacks that have revitalized their career in new spaces, but Geno Smith is a sit right now. 7 interceptions now on the season and only 6 touchdowns. He has been a top 12 quarterback 1 time. And I'm going to go ahead and stay away from him completely going up against Indianapolis because of the turnovers. Yes, we did see his ceiling 1 week, but since then, we have not seen it. And unfortunately, his floor is getting lower and lower because he keeps turning the ball over. Daniel Jones may be able to get himself back on track for his Comeback Player of the Year campaign this week going up against Las Vegas. Now, they're not a great defense. They gave Caleb Williams some trouble last week, but Jones does have 3 top 12 finishes this season. And one area that we want to keep in mind is Daniel Daniel Jones and his rushing ability. He didn't really have any of that last week. This week, though, Las Vegas allows the 9th most rushing yards to quarterbacks so far this season. We could see Daniel Jones pick up a few yards, maybe even a touchdown with his legs. Jackson Dart looked solid last week. Again, not numbers from a fantasy perspective that you're getting super excited about, but real life numbers that show you that he's ready to continue being the starting quarterback for the New York Giants. And this week, going up against the New Orleans Saints, he's going to have a much better matchup. They allow the 5th most fantasy points per game to the opposing quarterback. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and just list him as a start this week. I'm still going to put him as a fringe start, even though they have a great matchup. One of the reasons why, Malik Neighbors is gone. Obviously, without Malik Neighbors, it's going to shift what this offense potentially does a little bit more. Who is Jackson Dart going to go to? Is Wandell going to be his guy? Is it going to be Darius Slayton, Theo Johnson? They're going to run the ball with Cam Scatabo. For Jackson Dart, I think he potentially has an okay floor this week, but it's the ceiling without him seeing it too often yet that I'm a little bit worried about. But the one thing you do want to keep in mind as well, he may have had a little bit of a hamstring thing going on. It sounds like he's going to play. I haven't really heard much about it, but just keep an eye on it in case he aggravates it before the game. Man, Spencer Rattler, you got to give some love to Spencer Rattler. I know this guy doesn't have the squeaky clean persona as some other guys that come out of the NFL draft. He was on that Friday Night Light show. I think that's what it was called, or the QB1 show on Netflix, where he was in high school and they followed him around, and he was a terrible teammate and he got into trouble. And then he had issues staying in college. Like, just everything since high school, even being highly touted as a recruit, he hasn't had the easiest path in the world. And most of it is self-inflicted. But now he gets to the NFL level, and he's a darn good quarterback. He has been a QB2 every single week this season. If you're in a 2-quarterback or a superflex league, Spencer Rattler is exactly what you want as your superflex or your second quarterback. Dak Prescott, we're getting some high highs from him, but then he falls back to earth a little bit. 2 top 5 finishes, 2 finishes outside the top 15. And going up against the New York Jets this week, things might be, I would say things would have been easier this week than last week, but he looked great against Green Bay last week. So I'm back on board with Dak Prescott. Even without CeeDee Lamb going up against the New York Jets, I think he has a fine day, and he probably finishes right around that top 12 mark. I think Justin Fields has some pretty insane upside this week. Do I think he's going to be the quarterback 1? No, but I think his upside is potentially top 5 quarterback. Not only is he going to potentially add some points on the ground with his legs, but he's facing the defense that is allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And on Monday Night Football, he looked really solid. He completed 20 of 27 passes, 226 yards, and a touchdown. Those are the type of numbers that good NFL quarterbacks put up. And it doesn't feel like it's the type of numbers that we're used to with Justin Fields. If he can keep up with that, that would be excellent, especially if he continues to add 81 yards and a touchdown like last week on the ground. It's a great matchup, and I think Justin Fields has a ton of upside this week. Bo Nix finally found his ceiling last week, played very well going against the Cincinnati defense. But there's a big difference between Cincinnati and Philadelphia's defense. So Bo Nix is going to be a fringe start for me. The one thing that I did like seeing last week was a touchdown on the ground, because I actually talked about that in last week's show. I didn't feel like he was using his legs enough, and I would love to see him pick up a touchdown here or there on the ground. And he delivered. Hopefully he can keep up with that, especially going up against Philadelphia, moving the ball down the field. He may need to get out of the pocket, and he may need to end up running a little bit. Clearly, we're going to start Jalen Hurts, even against the defense, allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. If I were to tell you to sit Jalen Hurts even in this matchup, y'all would basically report the video and we get taken down off of YouTube. That is a gross misconduct, and I will not have it in my video. So Jalen Hurts is going to be a start. If you're rolling with him, you got to roll with him in the tough matchups as well. But this stat is insane, and I find it absolutely hilarious on so many levels, because right now Jalen Hurts is the quarterback 5, and he's the QB 5 despite being 25th in passing yards and having less passing yards than Cam Ward and Spencer Rattler. He's got 5 passing touchdowns this season. The yards that he's putting up on the ground, the touchdowns that he's putting up on the ground are making him a top 5 quarterback. Crazy to see that, but you're going to play him because he offers you that potential every week. For Miami and Carolina, I needed to sit and think about this one a little bit longer because Carolina's defense is allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. But is it because of who they've faced, or is it because they're really that good? Because in week 1, they went up against Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence, new head coach, week 1 with a new offense. Might be some struggles there. In week 2, they had Kyler Murray, and we know Kyler Murray can have inconsistencies as a passer in the NFL. In week 3, it was Michael Penix. Michael Penix looked terrible in week 3, and then bounced back and looked great in week 4. Michael Penix, defense, what is it? And then last week it was going up against Drake May and the Patriots. They gave up 42 points. Drake May looked pretty solid, passing for over 200 yards. So I struggled with this one because if you just take a look at the numbers on paper and the fact that Tua is now missing Tyreek Hill, I think Tua probably deserves to be a sit. He hasn't been any higher than QB 17 yet this season. But it's hard for me to list him as a sit in a week where we have a couple of injuries and we also have 4 guys missing, 2 of which are top 12 quarterbacks. So Tua for me is going to remain a fringe start. But when I say fringe, I mean fringe. I'm talking about QB 14, 15, 16, somewhere in that area as his upside. In a 1 quarterback league, I'm probably staying away. In a 2 quarterback superflex league, I definitely probably would still have him in my lineup. And I know definitely probably doesn't even make sense. I've got to also list Bryce Young as a fringe start, going up against Miami, currently allowing the 2nd most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And he's kind of the same way that Tua is. A little bit difference, he's got a really good matchup. And that's why I'm going to keep him in the lineup this week if you need somebody. If you have an injury, if you got a guy on a bye and waivers are thin and maybe Bryce Young is out there, if you were to pick up Bryce Young this week and play him, I don't think you're going to hate the type of performance that you get. So that's why I'm going to list him as a fringe start, because I think as a streaming option this week, he really isn't terrible. CJ Stroud had his best game of the season last week, and he still couldn't make it inside the top 12. Will he be able to do so this week going up against Baltimore, currently allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks? CJ Stroud has not had a ceiling yet this season. Maybe in this matchup, though, with all the injuries Baltimore has, we finally see CJ Stroud make it back into the top 12. Now, I'm not going to make him a must start. I'm not going to put him in green. I'm not going to list him as a guy that you absolutely need to play this week. But just like some of the other quarterbacks I've talked about, you could do a whole lot worse, and the matchup is solid. Now, Baltimore is playing the defense, allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And there is some talk that Lamar Jackson could end up missing not just this week, but he could end up missing maybe a couple of weeks at this point. Not a whole lot of information has been given out, so I decided to go ahead and add Cooper Rush because he's the backup quarterback, and we may need to talk about him, especially if you're a Lamar Jackson owner and maybe you're in a deeper league. You might not have any other choice. I would find another choice, though. I'm being honest with you. Going up against Houston, if Cooper Rush is playing, I am sitting him. That's not even in question unless you absolutely have no other option. Now, if for some reason Lamar Jackson plays, I'm still going to play Lamar Jackson. You're not sitting the QB2 on the season. From a fantasy perspective, it's going to continue to be a really tough year for Cam Ward. I don't think he's been awful at times, just when you take a look at him as a true NFL quarterback. From a fantasy perspective, though, he shouldn't even be owned at this point, especially in 1 quarterback leagues. If you're in a dynasty league or like a big keeper league, then yeah, Cam Ward absolutely needs to be on rosters. But even like in superflex or 2 quarterback leagues, Cam Ward, at best, is depth on your bench. And the only reason you're playing him is because both of your quarterbacks are either on a bye or hurt and you have no other options. Kyler Murray going up against Tennessee, allowing the 10th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. You're going to start Kyler Murray this week. You're not going to sit him, but he's a fringe start for me because he's a guy that's probably going to be at the back end of the top 12 quarterbacks. He still doesn't have a top 12 finish yet this season, but last week he did have a season high in rush yards, which is what I wanted to see from Kyler Murray. But it's hard to list him as a must-start player even in a week like this when he's averaging the quarterback 17 finish each week. Not a great matchup for Baker Mayfield this week. The Seattle Seahawks are allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield has played great this season. Do I think he's going to be a top 5 quarterback this week? No, I don't. He's got enough weapons, though, even with Mike Evans missing and potentially Bucky Irving as well, which it sounds like he will be out, that they can move the ball down the field and Baker Mayfield can still put up a decent amount of yards, even if he only throws like 1 touchdown. So Baker Mayfield may be at the back half of the top 12, but you're still playing him. Tampa Bay, however, is allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Now, does that mean I'm just going to list Sam Darnold as a start? No, I'm not. But I do think he has top 12 potential this week. He's been solid so far this year. He hasn't had a super high ceiling, but he's another option that if he's not owned, you can definitely stream him this week in a 1 quarterback league. In a 2 QB or a super flex league, he absolutely should be in your lineup as well if you own him. I don't need to spend a whole lot of time on Jared Goff here. Cincinnati allows the 9th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. He has a lower ceiling this week because I do think they're just going to run the crap out of the football all weekend against the Cincinnati Bengals. But I think Jared Goff is still going to have a super solid floor, top 12 potential. This offense looks lost with Jake Browning right now. And Jake Browning didn't look awful when he was a rookie with the Cincinnati Bengals 3 years ago. So I thought to myself, hey, you've been with the offense for 3 years now. You're not a rookie anymore. You can probably come in and still give us at least what we saw a few seasons ago when Joe Burrow went down with his injury. And we're not even getting close to that. Jake Browning is just an absolute disaster so far, and we're not even considering him for fantasy purposes. Even though Washington is 2-2, you gotta bet that both of these teams are going to be in the playoff conversation at the end of the season, which means these guys are gonna have to keep their golf clubs put away a little bit longer. But when it's time to get them out, they need to keep them clean with Caddy Splash. And you know the old saying, look good, play good. And I've been telling you all for the last few weeks, Caddy Splash is exactly the people that you need helping you on the golf course to do exactly that. If you're a scratch golfer, then you always are going to be taking care of your golf clubs, right? If you're a guy that goes out there and you end up sinking less putts than beers drank, you still don't want your golf clubs looking like they've been in your mom's attic for 13 years. And if you head to caddysplash.com or use the link down in the description below, code word headliners is going to get you 15% off of your order. And I know golfing season is almost done for those of us that get to see snow during the winter months. We're going to be putting our golf clubs away soon, and we got to keep them clean, and Caddy Splash is the way to do that. Right before I started recording this video, it was announced that Jaden Daniels would end up being a full participant in practice on Wednesday, and he's on track to play this weekend against the Chargers. But it's the NFL, and I'm not going to see it until I believe it. So if you have Jaden Daniels and he plays this week, you're absolutely going to start him. But I'm going to keep that injury designation symbol up there because we have no idea what could happen over the next couple of days. But if it's Marcus Mariota playing, we're not going that route. We are sitting Marcus Mariota. Washington is allowing the 7th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, and Justin Herbert has had some pretty decent upside this season. Did he last week? No, he did not. But this week, he absolutely could get right back on the horse and see himself with a big day once again. Drake May, another top 10 finish. He's going to get the Buffalo Bills this week, and they're going to be a little bit tougher than some of the matchups that he's had so far. But he's playing so well right now, we will keep him in our lineup. But do you know what I loved way more last week than the rushing touchdown or even how good he was through the air? It's no interceptions. And the more often he can have games like that, the higher his ceiling will go. Hey, Josh Allen, you're listed as a start. I don't have anything to say about you other than great job getting back in the end zone with a rushing touchdown this past week. Fantasy owners would love to see a few more. We are back to seeing some high upside play from Patrick Mahomes, and it feels like it's been a while since we've been able to say that for fantasy purposes. But last season, all year long, he only had 5 top 12 performances in fantasy football. This year, he already has 3. Let's fire him up. Realistically, I don't want to play Trevor Lawrence on Monday Night Football. Right now, Kansas City's allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points per game, and we know that defense can definitely screw with quarterbacks sometimes, and it's really hard to pick up on those pre-snap reads. I mean, he's not had a great ceiling. Last week, he completed 21 of 34 passes for 174 yards, a touchdown, and no interceptions, and I really don't expect his ceiling to be any better than that. Headliner Nation, hopefully this video helps you out. I know we're dealing with a couple of injuries. I know we've got some buys this week, and you're probably going to be looking for somebody to step in and help you out. In those one quarterback leagues, if you didn't have anybody on the bench, you might need to jump to the waivers. In 2 quarterbacks or super flex leagues, you should have had 2 decent quarterbacks. But if you're looking to maybe stream somebody, we had a couple of options this week as well. Do me a favor, on the way out, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, turn on the bell notifications, and think about becoming a member as well. Lots of members only access that you don't want to miss out on. Headliner Nation, stay safe, stay healthy. Appreciate everybody tuning into the start and sit videos this week, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.